The desert wind over Fort Dalton was merciless that morning. It carried with it fine grains of sand that shimmered under the harsh New Mexico sun, slipping through the cracks of the metal hangars and swirling around the rows of drones waiting for repair. Inside one of those hangars, Captain Mira Lawson stood hunched over a dismantled engine, her hand steady, her mind far away. The rhythmic hum of the power tools was her only companion, drowning out the whispers that floated behind her back. "Hey, Recon Bravo's ghost is fixing drones again," someone muttered. "Careful, she might crash this one too," another replied, followed by the low laughter of men who had never faced real silence, the kind that follows gunfire in a desert thousands of miles away. Mira ignored them. She had become skilled at pretending not to hear. Every chuckle, every whisper was a reminder of the title they branded her with, the woman who failed a mission, the one who cost her team their lives. Once, she had been a respected intelligence officer, trusted with operations the world would never read about. Now she was just a technician, a shadow moving between shelves of broken machinery. The wrench slipped slightly in her hand, cutting across her palm. A thin line of blood bloomed, bright against the dull gray of the drone's casing. She didn't flinch. Pain was familiar, quiet, simple, and honest. Unlike betrayal. The door to the hangar creaked open, and sunlight spilled across the floor. A group of young recruits entered, laughing, holding parts that needed calibration. Mira kept her head down, the sleeve of her uniform rolled halfway up her arm as she reached for a tool. One of the recruits stopped mid-laugh, his gaze freezing on her forearm. "Wait," he whispered, "what is that?" The room's noise died instantly. Even the whir of the cooling fans seemed to fade. On Mira's skin, dark against the pale light, was a tattoo, an intricate black eagle, geometric and sharp-edged, one wing fractured as if it had been torn apart mid-flight. No one in the hangar spoke. They didn't need to. Every soldier present recognized that design. They had seen it once, only once, buried deep within restricted files labeled Operation Iron Eclipse. Mira calmly lowered her sleeve, her expression unreadable. "Back to work," she said, her voice steady, carrying the tone of a woman used to command, even if no one officially followed her anymore. But the silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It was heavy, electric, the kind that precedes revelation or ruin. Outside, a black SUV pulled into the compound. The insignia of the U.S. Air Force gleamed faintly on its doors. Colonel Adam Reeves stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel. His reputation had arrived before he did. Cold, methodical, the kind of officer who could strip a man's career with a single report. He was at Fort Dalton for an inspection, but fate had a different agenda. Inside the hangar, the young recruit still stared at Mira's sleeve. "That tattoo, that's not supposed to exist," he murmured. Mira met his gaze for the first time, her gray eyes unwavering. "Neither are the people who wore it," she replied quietly. Reeve entered the building moments later, his presence commanding instant silence. His eyes swept across the room, noting the frozen faces, the tools left midair. And then his gaze landed on her, Captain Mira Lawson, the woman whose file was marked disgraced officer, recon failure, do not reassign. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition? Curiosity? Or perhaps, disbelief. As he walked past her, Mira straightened, her hand still faintly stained with blood. The colonel's eyes dropped to her arm, just as the sleeve shifted slightly, revealing a sliver of the broken-winged eagle. He stopped in his tracks. The air between them thickened. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Finally, Reeve said quietly, "Where did you get that?" Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You already know, Colonel." He did. The symbol had appeared in one of the most classified reports he'd ever read, Operation Iron Eclipse. A mission so dark that even generals spoke of it in whispers. The last surviving operative was presumed dead. Yet here she stood, breathing, working on drones like an ordinary mechanic. Reeves' voice lowered. That operation was sealed. Mira's eyes held his, calm but tired. Some seals don't hold forever. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the desert horizon, though there were no clouds, just a low tremor of sound, like the world exhaling before a storm. The colonel turned and walked away without another word, but something in his eyes had changed. And for the first time in years, Mira Lawson felt it, the faint, uneasy stir of the past awakening. As the hangar lights flickered, she looked down at her blood-stained hand and whispered to herself, they were never meant to know. But deep down, she knew the truth was already moving, quietly, like sand beneath the wind, ready to rise again. 2 years before the silence of Fort Dalton, Captain Mira Lawson's world had burned in the sun-scorched canyons of the Middle East. The mission was codenamed Operation Iron Eclipse, a joint CIA, Air Force initiative that officially never existed. 6 of the best operatives in the Western Hemisphere had been chosen for it: intelligence, extraction, reconnaissance, infiltration, and 1 specialist whose name never appeared in any database. Mira. They were sent into the Corridor Zayed, a maze of sandstone valleys and abandoned oil refineries where the wind carried both heat and secrets. The objective was simple on paper: rescue a captured diplomat believed to possess knowledge of a bioweapon agreement between rival states. In reality, it was a chessboard of betrayal. Their convoy moved through the desert at midnight. No headlights, no radio chatter, just the sound of tires over dust and the faint hum of a satellite uplink connecting them to command. Mira sat in the second vehicle, scanning encrypted feeds from her wrist console. Every few minutes, her headset crackled with coded transmissions, half of which didn't make sense. "Something's wrong," whispered Sergeant Vale, the sniper assigned to her unit. "Our uplinks being shadowed." Mira's instincts screamed agreement. Her team was being tracked. Yet orders from command insisted they move forward. Disobeying them wasn't an option. Or so she thought. By dawn, they reached the extraction zone, a half-collapsed warehouse near the edge of Zayed's canyon border. The air was unnaturally still. No guards, no hostiles, not even the hum of distant engines. Vale took position on the ridge, scanning through his scope. "Empty," he said. "Too empty." Then came the explosion. The first blast hit their lead vehicle, flipping it into a ball of fire. Mira's world went white with sand and sound. Before she could react, the second explosion tore through the convoy behind her. The shockwave hurled her to the ground. Her ears rang, her lungs screamed for air, and all she could taste was smoke. "Ambush!" someone shouted through the comms, but static swallowed the voice. She crawled behind a concrete barrier, pulled her sidearm, and looked through the rising heat. Enemy silhouettes emerged, 12, maybe 15, moving like ghosts through the flames. Her team fought back, but the trap was perfect. In the chaos, Mira caught sight of the diplomat, a man in civilian clothes, gagged, hands bound, being dragged by 2 hostiles toward a waiting helicopter. She didn't think. She ran. Bullets hissed past her. One grazed her shoulder, another shattered the drone controller on her wrist. She dove behind a rusted fuel drum, drew her secondary pistol, and fired 3 precise shots. Both hostiles dropped before they reached the chopper. She lunged forward, cutting the diplomat's restraints with her combat knife. "Who are you?" he gasped, his voice hoarse. "Someone who shouldn't be here," she replied, pulling him toward the debris. They didn't make it far before another missile screamed overhead. The ground erupted, swallowing the remaining vehicles in flame. She saw Vale, steady, fearless Vale, still on the ridge, lining up his final shot before the explosion consumed him. That image would stay with her forever, his silhouette framed by fire, rifle aimed toward the sky as if defying the gods themselves. By nightfall, she and the diplomat were the only ones left breathing. She found an abandoned radio inside the wreckage of the first truck and tried to transmit. No response. Command had gone silent. The diplomat's words came in broken bursts. "They knew about the weapon. They sent you to erase the proof." Mira stared at him, the realization cutting through her like shrapnel. The mission wasn't meant to succeed, it was meant to vanish. The 6 of them were disposable. For 3 days, they wandered through the canyons, hunted by patrols that shouldn't have known their route. On the 4th day, an unmarked drone appeared overhead, not hostile but American. It dropped a rescue beacon, no insignia, no ID. Mira triggered it out of desperation. A week later, she woke up in a military infirmary in Ramstein. No one asked what had happened. No one mentioned her team. Her debriefing was brief, sterile, and full of omissions. The official report listed mission failure, operator negligence. Her medals were stripped. Her rank was reduced. And her name was erased from the operations log. She remembered standing in front of the tribunal, staring at the panel of officers who wouldn't meet her eyes. "You're making a mistake," she said. "There was a rescue, not a retreat." But they had already decided. Someone had to bear the stain so the government could keep its treaties clean. From that day on, Mira Lawson ceased to exist as an intelligence officer. She was reassigned to Fort Dalton, filed under technical support. A convenient grave for inconvenient heroes. Now 2 years later, as the sound of Reeves' boots echoed through the hangar, the ghosts of Zayed stirred again. The world thought they had buried her story, but truth, like the desert wind, always finds its way through cracks. And deep down Mira knew, someone else had opened that file. Colonel Adam Reeve was not a man easily unsettled. He'd spent decades dissecting classified operations and commanding missions where one wrong call could turn a desert to a graveyard. Yet as he sat alone in his dimly lit office that night, the image of that tattoo, the fractured winged eagle, wouldn't leave his mind. He opened a secured terminal, the kind that required not just a password, but a retina scan and a silence thicker than faith. The system's hum filled the room. His fingers moved steadily over the keys as he typed a clearance command. Access, black chamber files, level Omega. A warning flashed across the screen, unauthorized entry subject to court-martial. He ignored it. The terminal blinked twice before displaying a list of sealed operations. The name he searched for appeared near the bottom, Iron Eclipse, classified termination, 2023. He clicked it open. The screen turned black, then loaded a string of redacted lines. Whole paragraphs were blacked out, names replaced with numeric codes. But one line was untouched. Subject, Lawson Mira. Status, terminated in field. Cause, unretrieved remains. Reeves' jaw tightened. Terminated? Then who was the woman standing in his hangar this morning, alive, bleeding, and wearing the mark only her unit carried? He leaned back, rubbing his temple. The pieces didn't fit. Either someone in the Pentagon had fabricated her death, or something much worse had been buried beneath the operation's ashes. Reeves' thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Enter," he said. Major Daniels stepped in, holding a tablet. "Sir, I've got the personnel logs you asked for." And, he hesitated. "There's something you should see." Reeve motioned him forward. The major swiped across the screen, displaying an internal memo stamped confidential, Ethics Committee hold. It contained a list of military personnel under disciplinary reassessment. Near the bottom, one name stood out, Captain Mira Lawson, conduct failure under Section 7.12, Mission Compromise. Daniels looked uneasy. "Sir, she was blacklisted from reassignment. No appeals allowed. Her record is sealed tighter than a nuclear launch code. I shouldn't even be able to see this." Reeve studied the screen, his expression unreadable. "And yet you did." I had to bypass 3 encrypted gates, sir. But if what she's carrying on her arm is what I think it is, she's not who they say she is." The colonel's eyes narrowed. "Get me every field report from that mission. The unedited ones. Pull them from any data vault you have to." "Yes, sir." When Daniels left, Reeve stared at the empty room for a long moment. The silence pressed in, heavy with memory. He'd seen this kind of thing before, soldiers turned into scapegoats to protect fragile politics. But this was different. There was a precision to the lie, an almost surgical erasure of truth. By midnight, his desk was buried under declassified fragments and torn reports. He pieced them together like a man assembling bones from a forgotten grave. The more he read, the clearer it became. Operation Iron Eclipse had succeeded. The diplomat had been rescued. The bioweapon threat had been neutralized. And the only casualty listed with certainty was integrity. The next morning, Reeve stood outside the logistics hangar again. Mira was there, same as always, wiping grease from her hands as if yesterday hadn't cracked the walls around her. "Captain Lawson," he called. She straightened slowly, turning toward him with guarded eyes. "Colonel." "I'd like a word," he said. "Privately." In his office, she sat across from him, her posture steady, expression unreadable. Reeve placed a folder on the desk, thick, worn, marked with the seal of the Department of Defense. "I reopened your file," he said. "It shouldn't exist. Yet here it is." Mira said nothing. "Iron Eclipse wasn't a failure," he continued. "Your team wasn't lost because of you. The evidence shows you completed the objective, then someone buried the truth." Her gaze didn't waver. "And what does that change, Colonel? My record? My reputation? They already erased both." "It changes everything," he replied. Because lies this precise serve a purpose. Someone high up wanted this forgotten, and they wanted you forgotten with it. Mira looked past him, toward the faint reflection of herself in the office window. The desert beyond shimmered in heat. You ever notice, Colonel, she said softly, that the truth in the military has an expiration date? Reeve frowned. Not if I can help it. She turned to meet his eyes. For the first time, there was a flicker of something beyond exhaustion, something close to trust. Then you'd better be ready to lose a few friends. He almost smiled. I don't have many left. A silence fell between them, deep and heavy. Reeve opened another file and slid a photograph across the desk. It was from a satellite capture, Mira kneeling beside the diplomat, half her face burned, her hand gripping his arm. The timestamp was from the day the mission supposedly failed. You didn't just survive, Reeve said quietly. You saved the only witness they needed to silence. Mira's voice was calm, but her hands clenched slightly. And they erased me for it. Reeve nodded. Not anymore. That night, the colonel signed an internal authorization, reopen case, evidence review under command order. The system flagged his action for higher clearance, but he overrode it. He knew the risk. Once this reached the Pentagon, the hornet's nest would stir. Across the base, in the quiet of her quarters, Mira traced the outline of her tattoo under the glow of a single lamp. The ink shimmered faintly, the broken-winged eagle reflecting in her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt something she'd forgotten, hope mixed with fear. Because the truth was rising. And when the truth rises, it demands payment. Fort Dalton woke before dawn. The desert air hung thick with a metallic scent of sand and machine oil. Soldiers moved briskly between hangars, their boots striking the gravel in rhythm. But the mood was different, uneasy, charged. Word had spread overnight. The disgraced technician wasn't who they thought she was. By mid-morning, Colonel Reeve's summons had reached every corner of the base. All personnel were to report to the main assembly hall at 0900 hours. The command tone was unmistakable, non-negotiable. Inside her quarters, Mira buttoned her uniform with slow precision. The same gray fatigue she'd worn for years, stained with the same history of silence. But today, they fit differently. She looked into the mirror, calm, collected, yet something in her eyes burned brighter than before. She tucked her dog tags inside her collar and whispered, "Let them see." At exactly 9, the great steel doors of the assembly hall closed. Hundreds of soldiers filled the rows, their murmurs dying as Reeve stepped onto the platform. The colonel stood tall, a folder clutched in his hand. Behind him, a large monitor glowed with the insignia of the U.S. Air Force. Officers. Specialists. Engineers. Recon, Reeve began, his voice steady and resonant. Today, I stand before you to correct a wrong that has lived in silence for too long. Whispers rippled through the hall. Mira entered quietly through the side door. Heads turned. The laughter that had once followed her down corridors was nowhere to be found. She moved to the front row and stopped, standing at ease, though her pulse was steady thunder in her veins. Reeve opened the folder. 2 years ago, a classified joint operation was conducted under the name Iron Eclipse. Official records claim that mission failed due to command error. 6 agents entered the corridor Zayed. Only 1 returned. That survivor was Captain Mira Lawson. He paused, letting the name sink in. Every eye turned toward her. She was accused of negligence, stripped of rank, and buried under false reports written to protect those who ordered an illegal mission. Evidence now confirms that Captain Lawson completed her objective, against impossible odds, and was abandoned by her own command. The silence that followed was suffocating. The young recruits who once mocked her stared down at their boots. Veterans exchanged uneasy glances, recognizing the weight of what they had done, of what they had believed. Reeve continued, his voice unshaken. For her service under fire, her resilience, and her unwillingness to compromise the truth even when it cost her everything, this officer has earned what was wrongfully taken. He turned toward her. Captain Lawson, front and center. Mira stepped forward, her boots echoing through the hall. She stopped before the podium, eyes locked on Reeves. He reached into the folder and withdrew 2 medals, the Distinguished Service Cross and the Silver Star, both gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. By authority of the Department of Defense, he declared, these honors are hereby restored. He pinned them to her uniform with deliberate care. The hall was still, no applause, no sound, only the collective weight of shame and respect. When he stepped back, Mira spoke. Her voice was low but clear enough to cut through the air. "I don't need redemption, Colonel. I needed the truth. And now that it's out, I hope none of you forget what it costs to stay silent." Her words hung there, simple, devastating, undeniable. For a long moment, no one moved. Then one soldier, a recruit barely out of training, stood and saluted. Another followed. Then another. Within seconds, the entire hall stood at attention, a forest of raised hands, their faces solemn. No one cheered. They didn't need to. The silence itself was honor. Reeve lowered his gaze briefly, then turned to address the base once more. "Captain Lawson has chosen not to return to active reconnaissance. Effective immediately, she will be transferred to the Veteran Restoration Program in Colorado Springs. There she will serve not as a technician or officer, but as a mentor, for those broken by the same system that broke her." Mira nodded once. "I know what it's like to be forgotten," she said softly. "Maybe I can help others remember who they are." As the ceremony concluded, Reeve approached her quietly. "You could have demanded reinstatement, even promotion," he said. "Why step away?" She smiled faintly. "Because, Colonel, medals don't mend the kind of wounds I've seen. People do." Outside, the desert stretched endless and bright, as if the land itself was breathing again. Mira walked toward the hangar one last time. The soldiers she passed didn't speak, but they stood taller, their silence carrying respect instead of scorn. At the entrance, she turned to see Reeve watching her from the steps of headquarters. He raised a hand, not a salute, but a quiet acknowledgement between two people who understood the price of integrity. That night, the stars over Fort Dalton shimmered like dusted glass. In the barracks, whispers replaced ridicule, stories of a captain who refused to vanish, who bore the weight of lies so others could sleep under the illusion of peace. Mira Lawson packed her duffel in silence. Before turning off the lights, she looked at the broken-winged eagle inked into her skin. The ink had faded over time, but the meaning hadn't. It was no longer a wound, it was a reminder. Tomorrow, she would leave the desert behind. But the fight for truth was far from over. A year had passed since the silence at Fort Dalton broke. The desert was a memory now, replaced by the crisp air and pine scent of the Colorado Rockies. The Veteran Restoration Center stood nestled in the valley below Pikes Peak, white buildings framed by evergreens, quiet paths winding between them. To outsiders, it looked peaceful. But to those inside, it was a battlefield of a different kind. Captain Mira Lawson, no longer in uniform, just Mira now, walked the perimeter each morning as the sun rose over the mountains. Her steps were slow, deliberate. She liked the stillness, the absence of orders. Around her, veterans gathered in small groups, some laughing softly, others staring at nothing, lost in the kind of memories that didn't fade. She stopped by the training yard where a young Marine sat on a bench, his prosthetic leg beside him, his face tight with frustration. "You're early," she said gently. "Couldn't sleep," he muttered. "Dreams again." "Same mission." He nodded, eyes downcast. "It's always the same. The explosion. The silence after." Mira crouched beside him. "Then don't fight the silence. Listen to it. Sometimes that's where the truth hides." He looked up at her, confused, but she smiled. That was enough for now. Healing wasn't about answers. It was about endurance. By noon she sat in her office, once a storage room, now filled with files, sketches, and coffee mugs with fading print. On the wall hung her medals, not as trophies but as reminders. A photograph rested on her desk, her old team from Iron Eclipse, 6 faces half-lit by the desert sun. Only hers remained alive to remember them. The door opened softly. Colonel No, Brigadier General, Adam Reeve stepped inside. He looked older now, a few more gray strands at his temples, but the same steel in his gaze. "You found the quietest corner in the Rockies," he said. Mira smiled faintly. That was the idea. He took a seat across from her, resting a folder on the desk. Its cover bore a new seal, Lawson Institute of Ethical Command. "It's official," he said. "Approved last week. Training begins next month." She ran her fingers over the embossed letters. "You're naming it after me?" "It's not about you," he replied. "It's about what you stood for. Young officers need to learn that courage isn't shouting louder than everyone else. It's standing alone when everyone else stays silent." She leaned back, thoughtful. "You really think they'll listen?" Reeve looked toward the window, where the snow-capped peaks caught the afternoon light. "Maybe not all of them. But some will. And sometimes, some is enough to change the course of everything." The sound of laughter drifted from outside, a group of veterans around the fire pit, sharing stories no history book would ever record. Mira stood and walked with him toward the courtyard. The campfire crackled, smoke curling into the cold mountain air. Around it sat men and women whose names never made the news: drone operators, recon scouts, intel analysts, medics. Soldiers the world had forgotten, but who had refused to forget themselves. Mira took a seat beside them. A younger recruit, barely 20, new to the program, watched her quietly before speaking. "Ma'am," he said, hesitant. "Is it true you were part of a mission that the government erased?" She smiled softly. "That's one way to put it." "What did it feel like?" he asked. "When everyone believed the lie." The firelight flickered against her face, casting shadows across her eyes. She paused, not to dramatize, but to choose the truth carefully. "It felt heavy," she said finally. "Like carrying a secret that burns your hands but you can't drop it, because if you do, no one else will ever know it existed." The recruit nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Another voice, an older veteran, added from across the flames, "And yet here we are. Still fighting." Mira looked around the circle. "That's the thing about the truth," she said. "It doesn't die when you bury it. It waits. It grows roots. And one day when someone digs deep enough, it breathes again." The group fell silent. The only sound was the pop of firewood and the distant rush of wind through pine. Reeve watched her quietly, pride in his eyes. "You know," he said, "I used to think courage was built in battlefields." She turned to him. "And now?" He smiled faintly. "Now I know it's built in places like this." The night deepened. The stars came out, vast and uncountable. Mira leaned back, her gaze fixed on the sky. Somewhere out there, her fallen team was at peace. Somewhere out there, the truth they died for had finally found a voice. The young Marine who'd lost his leg approached the fire, sitting beside her. He hesitated, then asked softly, "Captain, how did you keep going when everyone turned against you?" Mira looked at the flames, the tattoo on her arm glowing faintly in their light. The broken-winged eagle, now whole in her heart. She smiled. "Because the truth doesn't need witnesses to survive," she said. "It just needs one person who refuses to give up." The group sat quietly, the fire burning low but steady. In that still night high in the Colorado mountains, Captain Mira Lawson was no longer a ghost of a forgotten mission. She was the keeper of its flame, proof that even in silence, honor could speak. And somewhere, deep in the dark sky above, the stars seemed to shimmer a little brighter, as if the fallen were listening.